At number 10, Nineveh. The Nineveh civilization was one of the oldest and most impressive civilizations of the ancient world. Located in what is now modern-day Mosul in Iraq, this civilization thrived mostly under the rule of King Sennacherib from 704 BC to 681 BC. Under his leadership, Nineveh was made the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Their kingdom was massive and had a lot of impressive infrastructure like a 15-gate wall around the city, as well as parks, aqueducts, canals, and an 80-room palace. This place was so extravagant that some scholars today believe that the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon were actually located in Nineveh and were commissioned by King Sennacherib. Other than their infrastructure, their culture was also incredibly impressive as well. Nineveh was known as a center for the development of arts, sciences, and architecture, and scribes and scholars from elsewhere would flock to Nineveh to further their studies. They had a library that contained over 30,000 inscribed clay tablets, and one of those tablets included a story of a great flood that drowned the world except for one man who survived by building a boat and searching for dry land. Does that story sound familiar? It might, since it's an early version of the story of Noah's Ark. This version of the story though was inscribed 1,000 years before it ever reached Hebrew text. Now, even though this was a large and powerful civilization, all good things must come to an end, and they met their end after a royal feud led to the breakup, and this led to the joint forces of Persians, Babylonians, and others in the area to burning Nineveh to the ground.
Number 9. The Mesopotamian civilization. Next up, we have the first civilization ever recorded in history. Their origins date back to as early as 500 BC in what's now Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Mesopotamia is a staple in history. It's actually the first society that developed agriculture, and its name translates to between rivers or land between rivers. It was a perfect spot to domesticate animals for farming and for food. The oldest wheel ever was found in southern Mesopotamian city of Ur. They invented the wheel, cursive writing, and something even more important than all, they invented beer. The oldest recipe for beer comes from Mesopotamia. Wheels, poems, beer, this sounds like the world's oldest, and dare I say it, best party. Of course, aliens also come into play too when looking back at Mesopotamian culture. They had an advanced understanding of the cosmos using astronomical instruments. Now, one of these instruments was this Venus tablet of Ammisadaka, which could predict these astronomical events. Maybe our earliest civilization made contact and now they're just trying to reach out. Can you get ghosted over a tablet? Probably.
At number 8, Vinca. We're throwing it all the way back to the Neolithic period because we're talking about the Vinca civilization. Vinca is known as the oldest Neolithic civilization in Europe. These guys were establishing their own civilization in the Stone Age long before civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia. Though we don't know all that much about them, we do know that they had one of the earliest writing systems in the world. Researchers have discovered around 700 characters that are believed to have been their way of forming written sentences, though this is all just a theory for now since these characters have yet to be translated. The archaeological evidence that has been found from the Vinca civilization suggests that this group of people thrived in the area along the banks of the Danube River for more than 1,000 years before being abandoned. No one really knows why the Vinca civilization abandoned the area or where they went, but maybe one day we will get those answers.
Number 7. The Indus River Valley Civilization. What's now modern Pakistan was one of the world's earliest societies ever. It was also referred to as the Harappan Civilization, or the Indus. And they were actually quite large. We often hear about Vikings and how, there were thousands of them, or the 300 Spartan warriors. Well, the Indus were in the millions. Aside from the other earliest civilizations, Egyptians and Mesopotamians, they were considered the most extensive. The world's first ever dentists came from the Indus Valley. Something way more interesting than dentist facts is that when compared to Egyptian ancient cultures, the Indus never built any palaces or temples, right? Meaning there were probably no priests or kings. But we still get to study ancient texts. Those are always fun and often confusing. The Indus Valley civilization had a language that we're slowly but surely deciphering. But even so, there's around 250 to 500 characters that still remain a mystery. So, we can figure out what these guys ate thousands of years ago, but we have no idea what they were saying. Signs be hard. Number 6. Göbekli Tepe. Just 6 miles from the ancient Turkish city Urfa, Göbekli Tepe is 100,000 years old. And there are these massive stone circles created by a civilization that predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. We're convinced it's the world's oldest temple, a holy temple rather. This area in the world, I mean now it may not be a spectacle, but thousands of years ago, you would be able to see the horizon in every direction from this point. You'd also see herds of beautiful animals racing by. There'd be fields of barley, wild wheat. It would have looked like a temple from The Legend of Zelda. It was gorgeous and the landscape was fresh. Mind you, because it was so long ago. It was discovered back in 1960s. University anthropologists, they were doing a survey of the region. They found this place and assumed that it was an ancient cemetery and nothing more, and then continued on their merry way. Then cut to 1994, Klaus Schmidt was doing surveys for himself, found the same site, and knew right away from the first glance that this was man-made. Oh, imagine that. Imagine missing Göbekli Tepe the first time and being like, the cemetery. Number 5, Anasazi. Before the first skyscrapers were built in the 1880s, the Anasazi built massive stone buildings on the side of cliffs back in the 12th century. Some of these walls housed up to hundreds of residents, right? Like a skyscraper, a building, like a condo, just in the wall. What's now present-day Mesa Verde National Park was pretty intense back in the earlier days. Scientists have uncovered some hints as to where these creative cliff builders disappeared to. Well, violence, that seems to be the common denominator here. Yeah, the thing that's still going strong today, well, thousands of years ago, back in the 12th century United States, long-term drought led to the Anasazi to violence, and perhaps they wiped out each other. Other theories suggest that the Anasazi had to abandon their massive homes around the 1300s and then travel south. Either way, these are so impressive to look at. Number 4. Ancient Vikings. I'm a big Assassin's Creed fan. When they announced Vikings as their newest installment, I was pretty excited. Then I started playing it and I was like, yeah, that's not great. I'm a big Norse mythology fan, okay? But what actually happened to Greenland's Vikings? That's the mystery. Well, around 985 AD, Eric the Red arrived with a large fleet to colonize the island, and of course was subsequently banished for manslaughter. So now we have 2 colonies on Greenland, a large eastern colony and a small western one. Now these Vikings didn't build massive pyramids, but instead they built stone churches that are still standing to this day. These Vikings were around for a few hundred years, and at one point in time there were 5,000 Vikings, give or take. Now that's incredible, but later on in 1721, a missionary expedition arrived and there were not 5,000 Vikings. In fact, there were no Vikings. Where did they go? Archaeologists did the digging and apparently the western settlement died off around 1400 AD. And just decades later, the eastern settlement was abandoned. Well, there's a handful of family fun movies that hint to what happened. The Ice Age. Yeah. Well, the small one in the 14th century at least is the biggest factor on where these Vikings disappeared to. Yeah, just a small Ice Age classic. That's haunting for a Canadian to hear. Number 3, the Incas. Their city is currently a wonder of the modern world. Machu Picchu was built over 500 years ago. It was once known as the lost city of the Inca, and it's absolutely beautiful. It was first discovered in 1911 by archaeologist Hiram Bingham when he and a small team were originally heading out to find the ancient city of Vilcabamba, but instead they found this landmark. The stones used to build the city were even heavier than they already look. We look at Stonehenge in disbelief right now, wondering how humans were able to lift those rocks, but look at this place. These stones each weighed over 50 tons, and with Machu Picchu literally translating to Old Mountain, those hills certainly don't look easy to climb. I complained about doing 2 trips carrying groceries. My back hurts just looking at this thing. The Inca were impressive builders. The city is designed perfectly. I mean, evidently. After 500 years of earthquakes and horrible weather, it's wild that the city is still in the shape that it's in. Elongated skulls were also found on the site by archaeologists, and many believe that it's aliens thanks to pop culture, but elongated skulls were actually a sign of royalty in the Incas. It's no surprise Machu Picchu is the most visited place in Peru. You just might want to take your trail shoes when you head over there.
On number 2, Norte Chico civilization. The story of the Norte Chico civilization is fascinating, yet also shrouded in mystery. Overall, very little is known about the Norte Chico civilization, but it is believed that this pre-Columbian society is one of the oldest known civilization in the Americas. Researchers know more about this civilization's infrastructure than the way that the people lived. We know that they had huge buildings like pyramids and complex irrigation systems, but what makes this so bizarre is the fact that there's no evidence of any pottery in the civilization, which suggests that they don't know how to use it. How are you gonna build a whole pyramid but struggle to make a pot? I don't get it. There is also evidence that these people worshipped some kind of deity, but again, no one knows what form this deity took. Now here's where the mystery really comes in. No one knows what happened to the Norte Chico civilization. The settlements were abandoned sometime around 1800 BC, but no one really knows why. There's no evidence of any kind of warfare, and there were no natural disasters to cause them to flee their homes. The people just kind of disappeared, and no one has been able to piece together the puzzle, so we may never know.
And coming in at number 1, the Greek civilization. The Antikythera mechanism is the world's oldest analog computer. It would keep track of the cosmos, and to this day we're trying to figure out the exact purpose of it or how it was built. But what we do know is that one of those dials in there was meant to keep track of the Olympics. That's how important this event was. Thanks to the ancient Greeks, now we get to see dudes hucking shot puts at people. It's great. The ancient Greek civilization thrived in Greece around 500 BC to 2700 BC. The rich history of ancient Greeks spans such a long time that we've divided their time into periods, like the Archaic, Hellenistic, and Classical period. Their wine was so good that they had a wine god in the pantheon, god Dionysus. What an OG. It was deemed a hubris for Greeks to get intoxicated, so they would also add water to their wine. That way they could keep the party going all night, of course, but actually it was done so nobody became violent. Only god Dionysus would drink wine straight out. That's pretty hardcore. If inventing the Olympics wasn't badass enough, they also used stones instead of toilet paper, so I'll let you imagine that in your head. We'll leave on that note. That's a nice pretty image to finish on.
And number 10, the Silla. Even though the Silla kingdom was one of the longest standing royal dynasties ever, not many people know about it because very few traces of their existence have been left behind. The Silla ruled most of the Korean peninsula between 57 BCE and 935 CE, but again, not much is known about them. Very few burial sites have been found, and the majority of what's been recovered by researchers are various treasures such as ornate jewelry and weapons. One set of remains that was discovered by archaeologists did, however, give scientists a bit of a glimpse into the life of the Silla. The remains of a woman estimated to be in her early 30s was found, and from what scientists discovered, they know that she was likely a vegetarian and that she had an elongated skull, which may suggest that the Silla could have practiced body modifications in their society, but nothing can be confirmed. The story of how the Silla came to be comes from legend. It was said that the Silla was founded by a man that was hatched from a mysterious egg in the forest and married a queen who was born from the ribs of a dragon. Knowing this legend, it's not surprising to find out that this society was very aristocratic. If your founder was hatched from an egg and married a queen, then there's gotta be some kind of hierarchy going on. At number 8, the Sangsing-Dui. This Bronze Age culture is believed to have lived in what is now China's Sichuan province. First evidence of this group of people was first discovered in the late 1920s, but despite efforts of archaeologists and researchers, not much is known about this ancient tribe. What we do know about them is that the Sangsing-Dui were a very artistic group. Based on some of the artwork found by researchers, this group of ancient people were prolific makers of bronze and gold foil masks. Some scientists believe that these masks may have represented certain gods in their culture or even ancestors. No one really knows what happened to this group of people though. There is evidence that the Sangsing-Dui abandoned their homes 2800 to 3000 years ago and may have moved to a neighboring province, but more research is needed to prove this. As for why they may have relocated, some researchers believe that perhaps there was an earthquake or even a landslide that caused people to flee.
Number 7, the Mayans. It's 2021, which means the world thankfully didn't end in 2012. But that movie was good. Kind of, not really. But the Mayan calendar did predict that on December 21st, 2012, this would be the end of us. No meteors hit and Thanos didn't snap away any of us, but that date did mark the end of their 5,125 year-long count calendar. Yeah, and you thought you were a planner. These guys were crazy. One of the earliest uses of the number 0 being in mathematics came from the Mayans. They were super advanced for their time, and they were also quite artistic. They drew complex hieroglyphs on long strips of paper made from fig tree bark. I can't write 4 sentences down on paper without my wrist hurting. I have to slap it around for a minute. These guys are on a whole new level. These stories date all the way back to the late pre-classic period, so around 300 BCE. That is so old. The Olmecs of Mesoamerica figured out how to consume chocolate, sure, but like the art that we see etched into the stone walls around them, the Mayans made it beautiful. The Mayans would mix chocolate with water and chili peppers and honey. They would make it as a spicy drink. I'm gonna stick with the old pumpkin spice for now. I think that's the riskiest I'll go. Thanks so much though. Debit.
At number 6, Mehrgarh. Even though Mehrgarh was a pretty impressive civilization, no one really knows about it because very little interest was invested in learning more about it. Mehrgarh was one of the oldest civilizations in the world, situated in what is now modern-day Pakistan. Excavations of the site started back in the 1970s, but due to the government's lack of interest, looting, and land erosion, it made it hard to learn much about this ancient settlement. From evidence that has been gathered, we do know that Mehrgarh had a population of around 25,000 people, and based on some of the remains recovered from this ancient civilization, there was evidence of dental surgery, which, as you can imagine, isn't really something you see very often, especially at the time that this civilization existed. Other than that, many of the other secrets of the civilization are buried very deep in the earth, so it makes it much harder for researchers to uncover them. What has been found though are some pretty well preserved buildings made from brick, and even a formal cemetery. Who knows what else we might learn from this site.
Number 5. Rapa Nui. Also referred to as the Easter Islanders, the Rapa Nui is known most famously for their Easter Island heads, the moai, that still to this day reach up to 13 feet tall and weigh over 80 tons. Massive achievements. Now, how did they build these things, and also how do they move them around? Well, there's of course a crazy alien theory, and it's my favorite theory of all. The indigenous Rapa Nui claim that these statues once roamed the land, like Night at the Museum, but with, less bubblegum and fun. There were once thousands of these sculptures, but during the 1700s, civil wars resulted in the Rapa Nui tearing them all apart. It was already an impressive feat building the moai, but in 1914, archaeologists discovered they also had bodies beneath them. Just like us YouTubers, you never know underneath here. We could be 7 feet tall, or we could be 5 feet tall. You really don't know. Look at this. You have no idea. The theory that all these statues would move around seems a little bit more plausible now that we know that.
And number 3, the Danubians. The Danubians were an ancient civilization who thrived near the Balkan foothills and the lower Danube Valley between 5500 BCE and 3500 BCE. Over the course of 1500 years, the Danubians became one of the most advanced societies at this time. They were best known for their work with terracotta, more specifically their creation of goddess figurines. Though they are impressive pieces, the purpose of these figurines remains unknown to researchers, but many speculate that they were used to celebrate the strength of women in their culture. The Danubians were also known to cast gold into graves, and they seem to have taken this very seriously since one of the cemeteries they found had a collection of around 3,000 pieces of gold. Though they were very impressive for their time, they later just seem to have vanished or died off. But researchers have yet to piece together exactly what happened to these ancient people. At number 2, the Jiahu. Before the rise of China's great dynasties, smaller tribes covered the area, each with their own unique cultures. One of the oldest of these ancient tribes were the Jiahu, and they were located in what is now modern-day Hainan province in eastern China. The Jiahu were China's first identifiable civilizations, and they thrived between 7000 BCE and 5700 BCE. The artifacts that researchers were able to recover from this 9,000-year-old civilization contain things like the world's earliest wine, the oldest working musical instruments, such as flutes made from the bones of birds, some of the oldest preserved rice, as well as the earliest samples of Chinese writing. As for what happened to the Jiahu people, researchers believe that they migrated elsewhere due to flooding from the nearby rivers. And finally, at number 1, Ain Ghazal. Located in what is now modern-day Jordan, Ain Ghazal was a Neolithic society that boomed during the transition between hunter-gatherer tribes and established civilizations. This ancient society started off with roughly 3,000 people as they came together to create their unique culture, and they also began to develop impressive artwork that decorated their metropolis. Things like plaster figurines of pregnant women and other stylized human figures were found to have adorned their cities. Archaeologists found evidence of this society's transition to farming and agriculture, noting their heavy use of goat herds and vegetable storage. Though the Ain Ghazal society was booming and growing, researchers have noticed groups of people packed up in a hurry and deserted their settlement, with over 90% of the population migrating elsewhere. No one quite knows what prompted so many people to leave the area, but it's most likely that they migrated to other established societies, leaving behind their transitional city for something more modern for their time.
Starting our list off at number 10, the first skull. Before we get into some mysterious happenings in history, we have to talk about the very first Neanderthal skull that was ever discovered. The discovery came about back in 1829. The skull was found in a cave near Indus, Belgium. Now at the time, they didn't even realize it was the skull of a Neanderthal. That knowledge came much later, around 1856. And at that time, quarry workers were ripping apart limestone in a Fedhofer cave near the Germany city Dusseldorf. But this skull was found in Neanderthal, a small valley of the Dussel River. Yeah. Hence, the name, now we understand that. The skull was human, but it wasn't. This was game-changing. Number 9, medicine. You can only imagine the various injuries Neanderthals would have. Hunting down a mammoth or, a bison 3 times the size of you, odds are you're gonna get a bruise or two. So what did Neanderthals do at this point? Well, that's what this pile of bones is for. Yeah, it's so dark, right? How did Neanderthals live so long without a pharmacy? All that yelling, no halls, that's gonna hurt. Neanderthals' medical skills are pretty similar to what our ancestors did. Herbal remedies, baby, that's it, herbal remedies. They managed fevers, but when the pain got too bad, chewing on a specific tree may have helped tolerate the pain. So now when looking back to these piles of bones, we find fragments of these leaves in their, dental cavities. We could study their teeth and be like, yes, I can see what you had for lunch. This makes sense. 40,000 years before penicillin, Neanderthals were chewing on aspirin. They were brilliant. Little dirty secret there. Number 8. Ancient art. Okay, here's where we're at with Neanderthals and art. First of all, we don't have actual representational art, but we do have symbolism. That's pretty close, and also just as fascinating in my opinion, especially when they look like this. These are eagle talons, right? They're about 130,000 years old. They were found recently in the Krapina Neanderthal site in Croatia. Now, researchers believe that they were part of a jewelry set, like earrings, or part of a necklace. I couldn't even make this now with the YouTube tutorial. You know what I mean? Yet somehow civilizations were crafting this thousands of years ago. 130,000 years ago. That's crazy.
At number 7, the Nok. The Nok tribe from what is now northern Nigeria lasted from 1000 BCE to 300 BCE and was a very mysterious culture that was actually discovered by complete accident. Tin miners happened to find ancient artifacts, including a terracotta head, during a mining operation in 1943. This discovery began a larger excavation expedition in the area, and they have since found plenty of other terracotta artifacts and sculptures, including depictions of people wearing jewelry and carrying weapons like batons and flails. Some of their sculptures also depicted people with diseases like elephantitis. Nok artifacts have a history of being stolen or removed from archaeological sites without notice, which has some researchers wondering what, other than their historical significance, makes them so prone to thefts. There is for sure a mystery there. At number 6, the Etruscans. In northern Italy between 700 BCE and 500 BCE, there lived an ancient society of people called the Etruscans. This group of people were a thriving theocratic society, that is, before they were eventually absorbed into the Roman Republic. The Etruscans had their own written language and left behind a number of luxurious family tombs as well. As I mentioned, this society was theocratic, as the artifacts they left behind suggest that religion and rituals were a big part of their daily lives. Among some of the artifacts that have been discovered by researchers include the earliest depictions of childbirth in Western art, and even a number of sandstone slabs that had been engraved with ancient Etruscan text. The archaeological sites where researchers continue to uncover the secrets of this ancient populace have revealed over 25,000 artifacts, and scientists continue to uncover more each day. At number 5, the land of Punt. One of the most mysterious ancient tribes that you might not have known about are the people of the land of Punt. Many of the ancient cultures that we know about today we've learned through ancient texts, and this is basically the case with the land of Punt. We only know about them through Egyptian records. What we do know about the ancient land of Punt is that it was a kingdom somewhere in Africa that regularly made trades with ancient Egyptians. The land of Punt and the ancient Egyptians were trading goods from at least the 26th century BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, who was also known as the builder of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Now, even though we know that the land of Punt traded with ancient Egyptians, we don't know exactly where these people were located. The Egyptians kept record of the goods that were being traded with the land of Punt, like gold, ebony, and myrrh, but they didn't exactly keep record of where these goods were being sent, which has researchers frustrated because they can only hypothesize where these goods may have been sent. Some researchers believe that perhaps the land of Punt was located somewhere in Arabia, or perhaps on the Horn of Africa, or maybe somewhere down the Nile River that is now southern Sudan and Ethiopia. I honestly hope that one day the location of the land of Punt is found, because there could be so many amazing finds waiting to be discovered. At number 4, the Bell Beakers. Here's yet another mysterious ancient tribe that you might not have known about. The Bell Beakers are such a mystery that researchers base their name on the only artifacts that have ever been found from these ancient people. The Bell Beakers are known for their pottery that looks like upside down bells, hence the name. These ancient people are believed to have lived across Europe between 2800 BCE and 1800 BCE. Other than their distinctive bell beakers, this ancient tribe also left behind copper artifacts as well as burial sites. An ancient bell beaker cemetery containing 154 graves was found in what is now modern-day Czech Republic. Some researchers believe that the bell beakers may have also been responsible for the construction of part of Stonehenge. There are still many unanswered questions about the bell beakers, but until scientists find more evidence, this is all the information that we have on them for now.
Number 3. Easter Island. Back between 300 and 1200 AD, Polynesians used canoes, not Carnival cruise ships, canoes to somehow travel all the way to Easter Island, over 2,000 miles away from Chile. Yeah, that feat in itself is impressive, but when you start really thinking about the Easter Island heads on the actual island, it gets even more impressive. The Easter Island Moai statues, keep in mind there were hundreds, reach up to 32 feet high, and they weigh over 82 tons. It was a sight to see. That was until the 1800s. That's when the civilization suddenly vanished out of nowhere. Many of these statues were also destroyed during this time. The population as well was decreased drastically, and the island's higher-ups, be it priests or chiefs, whoever, were all overthrown. Well, whatever happened may give us some ideas for the future. Easter Islanders cut down so many trees that before their seeds could even enter the earth again, rats ate them. So these guys simply ran out of trees, which means they ran out of rope or the ability to make more canoes. So they were trapped. So naturally, a civil war began alongside starvation. Plus the arrival of Europeans in 1722, they immediately wiped out most of the remaining Easter Islanders. And then around the late 1800s, waves of smallpox reduced the amount of island natives to just 100. It was brutal. Number 2, the Mississippians. We'll dial back the calendar now to 700 CE. Now at this point, before European colonization, the American Southeast was home to the Mississippians. Their main area was the city called Cahokia, which is now modern-day Collinsville, Illinois. And that's not large either, it's just 6 square miles. Now check out this photo of Monk's Mound, a now historic site. We look at ancient Egyptians and our jaws drop at the sight of those pyramids, plus their alignment with the stars. That's obviously, of course, fascinating. Well, Cahokia was once home to pyramids and large wooden structures as well. We're not exactly sure what happened to this 40,000 person civilization, but experts guess famine and disease were one of the many factors. And finally, number 1. Clovis. Taking a look at some mammoth hunters for our last point here. Now this civilization is considered the first inhabitants of the New World. Pretty intense stuff. Hunters would use what's called Clovis points to get their next meal. They would use chipped flint, and they had to hunt bison, mammoths, deer, anything that had skin to be used for shelter and or clothing. In fact, this 10,000-year-old civilization may have disappeared at the same time as mammoths. After all, with these historical beasts acting as both your gear and your food, yeah, eating them ought to do some damage down the road. Not even an ice age was included yet, and already they're running out of resources.